The ancient Greek philosopher Thales was born in Miletus in Greek Ionia. Aristotle, the major source for Thales's philosophy and science, identified Thales as the first person to investigate the basic principles, the question of the originating substances of matter, and therefore as the founder of the school of natural philosophy. Thales was interested in almost everything, investigating almost all areas of knowledge, philosophy, history, science, mathematics, engineering, geography, and politics. He proposed theories to explain many of the events of nature, the primary substance, the support of the earth, and the cause of change. Thales was much involved in the problems of astronomy and provided a number of explanations of cosmological events which traditionally involved supernatural entities. His questioning approach to the understanding of heavenly phenomena was the beginning of Greek astronomy. Thales' hypotheses were new and bold, and in freeing phenomena from godly intervention, he paved the way towards scientific endeavor. He founded the Milesian School of Natural Philosophy, developed the scientific method, and initiated the first Western Enlightenment. Many anecdotes are closely connected to Thales' investigations of the cosmos. When considered in association with his hypotheses, they take on added meaning and are most enlightening. Thales was highly esteemed in ancient times, and a letter cited by Diogenes Laertius and purporting to be from Anaximenes to Pythagoras advised that all our discourse should begin with a reference to Thales. Doubts have always existed about whether Thales wrote anything, but a number of ancient reports credit him with writings. Simplicius specifically attributed to Thales authorship of the so-called Nautical Star Guide. Diogenes Laertius raised doubts about authenticity, but wrote that, according to others, Thales wrote nothing but two treatises, one on the solstice and one on the equinox. Lobon of Argos asserted that the writings of Thales amounted to 200 lines, and Plutarch associated Thales with opinions and accounts expressed in verse. Hesychius recorded that Thales wrote on celestial matters in epic verse, on the equinox, and much else. Callimachus credited Thales with the sage advice that navigators should navigate by Ursa Minor, advice which may have been in writing. Diogenes mentions a poet, Cerylus, who declared that Thales was the first to maintain the immortality of the soul, and in De Anima, Aristotle's words, from what is recorded about Thales, indicate that Aristotle was working from a written source. Diogenes recorded that Thales seems by some accounts to have been the first to study astronomy, the first to predict eclipses of the sun and to fix the solstices. So Eudemus in his History of Astronomy. It was this which gained for him the admiration of Xenophanes and Herodotus and the notice of Heraclitus and Democritus. Eudemus, who wrote a history of astronomy and also on geometry and theology, must be considered as a possible source for the hypotheses of Thales. The information provided by Diogenes is the sort of material which he would have included in his History of Astronomy, and it is possible that the titles on the solstice and on the equinox were available to Eudemus. Xenophanes, Herodotus, Heraclitus, and Democritus were familiar with the work of Thales and may have had a work by Thales available to them. Proclus recorded that Thales was followed by a great wealth of geometers, most of whom remain as honored names. They commence with Mamercus, who was a pupil of Thales, and include Hippias of Elis, Pythagoras, Anaxagoras, Eudoxus of Cnidus, Philippus of Mende, Euclid, and Eudemus, a friend of Aristotle, who wrote histories of arithmetic, of astronomy, and of geometry, and many lesser-known names. It is possible that writings of Thales were available to some of these men. Any records which Thales may have kept would have been an advantage in his own work. This is especially true of mathematics, of the dates and times determined when fixing the solstices, the positions of stars, and in financial transactions. It is difficult to believe that Thales would not have written down the information he had gathered in his travels, particularly the geometry he investigated in Egypt and his measuring of the height of the pyramid, his hypotheses about nature and the cause of change. Proclus acknowledged Thales as the discoverer of a number of specific theorems in a commentary on the first book of Euclid's Elements. This suggests that Eudemus, Proclus's source, had before him the written records of Thales's discoveries. How did Thales approve his theorems, if not in written words and sketches? The works on the solstice, on the equinox, which were attributed to Thales, and the nautical star guide to which Simplicius referred, may have been sources for the history of astronomy of Eudemus. Aristotle defined wisdom as knowledge of certain principles and causes. He commenced his investigation of the wisdom of the philosophers who preceded him with Thales, the first philosopher, and described Thales as the founder of natural philosophy. He recorded, Thales says that it is water. It is the nature, the arche, the originating principle. For Thales, this nature was a single material substance, water. Despite the more advanced terminology which Aristotle and Plato had created, Aristotle recorded the doctrines of Thales in terms which were available to Thales in the 6th century BCE. Aristotle made a definite statement and presented it with confidence. It was only when Aristotle attempted to provide the reasons for the opinions that Thales held and for the theories that he proposed that he sometimes displayed caution. Thales and mythology. Those who believe that Thales inherited his views from Greek or Near Eastern sources are, well, wrong. Thales was esteemed in his times as an original thinker, one who broke with tradition and not as one who conveyed existing mythologies. Aristotle unequivocally recorded Thales's hypothesis on the nature of matter and offered a number of conjectures based on observation in favor of Thales's declaration. His report provided the testimony that Thales supplanted myth in his explanations of the behavior of natural phenomena. Thales did not derive his thesis from either Greek or non-Greek mythological traditions. Thales would have been familiar with Homer's acknowledgements of divine progenitors, but he never attributed the organization or control of the cosmos to the gods. Aristotle recognized the similarity between Thales's doctrine about water and the ancient legend which associates water with Oceanus and Tethys, but he reported that Thales declared water to be the nature of all things. Aristotle pointed to a similarity to traditional beliefs, not a dependency upon them. Aristotle did not call Thales a theologian in the sense in which he designated the old poets and others, such as Pherecydes, as mixed theologians who did not use mythical language throughout. To Aristotle, the theories of Thales were so obviously different from all that had gone before that they stood out from earlier explanations. Thales's views were not ancient and primitive, they were new and exciting, and the genesis of scientific conjecture about natural phenomena. It was the view for which Aristotle acknowledged Thales as the founder of natural philosophy. The problem of the nature of matter and its transformation into the myriad things of which the universe is made engaged the natural philosophers, commencing with Thales. For his hypothesis to be credible, it was essential that he could explain how all things could come into being from water and return ultimately to the originating material. It is inherent in Thales's hypotheses that water had the potentiality to change to the myriad things of which the universe is made, the botanical, physiological, meteorological, and geological states. In Timaeus, Plato had Timaeus relate a cyclic process. The passage commences with that which we now call water and describes a theory which was possibly that of Thales. Thales would have recognized evaporation and have been familiar with traditional views such as the nutritive capacity of mist and ancient theories about spontaneous generation, phenomena which he may have observed, just as Aristotle believed he himself had, and about which Diodorus Siculus, Epicurus, Lucretius, and Ovid wrote. When Aristotle reported Thales's pronouncement that the primary principle is water, he made a precise statement. Thales says that it is water, but he became tentative when he proposed reasons which might have justified Thales's decision. Thales's supposition may have arisen from observation. It was Aristotle's opinion that Thales may have observed that the nurture of all creatures is moist, and that warmth itself is generated from moisture and lives by it, and that from which all things come to be is their first principle. Then, in the lines, Aristotle's tone changed towards greater confidence. He declared, besides this, another reason for the supposition would be that the semina of all things have a moist nature. In continuing the criticism of Thales, Aristotle wrote, that from which all things come to be is their first principle. Simple metallurgy had been practiced long before Thales presented his hypotheses, so Thales knew that heat could return metals to a liquid state. Water exhibits sensible changes, more obviously than any of the other so-called elements, and can readily be observed in the three states of liquid, vapor, and ice. The understanding that water could generate into Earth is basic to Thales's watery thesis. At Miletus, it could readily be observed that water had the capacity to thicken into Earth. Miletus stood on the Gulf of Leyde, through which the Meander River emptied its waters. Within living memory, older Milesians had witnessed the island of Lade increasing in size within the Gulf, and the riverbanks encroaching into the river to such an extent that at Preen, across the Gulf from Miletus, the warehouses had to be rebuilt closer to the water's edge. The ruins of the once prosperous city port of Miletus are now 10 kilometers distant from the coast, and the island of Lade now forms part of a rich agricultural plain. There would have been opportunity to observe other areas where Earth generated from water, for example, the deltas of the Thales, the Ister, about which Hesiod wrote, now called the Danube, the Tigris-Euphrates, and almost certainly the Nile. This coming into being of land would have provided substantiation of Thales's doctrine. To Thales, water held the potentialities for the nourishment and generation of the entire cosmos. Aetius attributed to Thales the concept that even the very fire of the sun and the stars, and indeed the cosmos itself, is nourished by evaporation of the waters. It is not known how Thales explained his watery thesis, but Aristotle believed that the reasons he proposed were probably the persuasive factors in Thales's considerations. Thales gave no role to the Olympian gods. Belief in the generation of Earth from water was not proven to be wrong until AD 1769, following experiments of Antoine Lavoisier, and spontaneous generation was not disproved until the 19th century as a result of the work of Louis Pasteur. Thales proposed answers to a number of questions about the Earth: the question of its support, its shape, its size, and the cause of earthquakes, the dates of the solstices, the size of the sun and moon. In De Caelo, Aristotle wrote, "This opinion that the Earth rests on water is the most ancient explanation which has come down to us, and is attributed to Thales of Miletus." He explained his theory by adding the analogy that the Earth is at rest because it is of the nature of wood and similar substances which have the capacity to float on water, although not on air. In metaphysics, Aristotle stated quite unequivocally, Thales declared that the Earth rests on water. This concept does appear to be at odds with natural expectations, and Aristotle expressed his difficulty with Thales' theory. Perhaps Thales anticipated problems with acceptance because he explained that it floated because of a particular quality, a quality of buoyancy similar to that of wood. At the busy city port of Miletus, Thales had unlimited opportunities to observe the arrival and departure of ships with their heavier-than-water cargoes, and recognized an analogy to floating logs. Thales may have envisaged some quality common to ships and Earth, a quality of floatiness or buoyancy. It seems that Thales's hypothesis was substantiated by sound observation and reasoned considerations. Indeed, Seneca reported that Thales had land supported by water and carried along like a boat. Aristotle's lines in Metaphysics indicate his understanding that Thales believed that because water was the permanent entity, the Earth floats on water. Thales may have reasoned that as a modification of water, Earth must be the lighter substance, and floating islands do exist. Herodotus was impressed when he saw Chemis, a floating island about 38 kilometers northeast of Naucratis, the Egyptian trading concession which Thales probably visited. Seneca described floating islands in Lydia. There are many light pumice-like stones of which islands are composed, namely those which float in Lydia. Pliny described several floating islands, the most relevant being the Reed Islands in Lydia, and Pliny described a circular floating island, its buoyancy and the way it moved. Thales could have visited the nearby Reed Islands. He might have considered such readily visible examples to be models of his theory, and he could well have claimed that the observation that certain islands had the capacity to float substantiated his hypothesis that water has the capacity to support Earth. Again, it is understood that Thales did not mention any of the gods who were traditionally associated with the simple bodies. We do not hear of Oceanus or Gaia, we read of water and earth. The idea that Thales would have resurrected the gods is quite contrary to the bold, new, non-mythical theories which Thales proposed. Modern commentators assume that Thales regarded the earth as flat, thin and circular, but there is no ancient testimony to support that opinion. On the contrary, Aristotle may have attributed knowledge of the sphericity of the earth to Thales, an opinion which was later reported by Aetius and followed by Pisa's Plutarch. Aristotle wrote that some think it spherical, others flat and shaped like a drum, and then attributed belief in a flat earth to Anaximenes, Anaxagoras and Democritus. If following chronological order, Aristotle's words, some think it spherical, referred to the theory of Thales. Aristotle then followed with the theory of Thales' immediate Milesian successor, Anaximander, and then reported the flat earth view of Anaximenes, the third of the Milesian natural philosophers. There are several good reasons to accept that Thales envisaged the earth as spherical. Aristotle used these arguments to support his own view. First is the fact that during a solar eclipse, the shadow caused by the interposition of the Earth between the Sun and the Moon is always convex. Therefore, the Earth must be spherical. In other words, if the Earth were a flat disk, the shadow cast during an eclipse would be elliptical. Second, Thales, who is acknowledged as an observer of the heavens, would have observed that stars which are visible in a certain locality may not be visible further to the north or south, a phenomena which could be explained within the understanding of a spherical Earth. Third, from mere observation, the Earth has the appearance of being curved. From observation, it appears that the Earth is covered by a dome. When observed from an elevated site, the sky seems to surround the Earth like a dome to meet the apparently curved horizon. If observed over the seasons, the dome would appear to revolve, with many of the heavenly bodies changing their position in varying degrees, but returning annually to a similar place in the heavens. Through his work in astronomy, Thales would almost certainly have become familiar with the night sky and the motion of the heavenly bodies. There is evidence that he gave advice to navigate by Ursa Minor and was so involved in observation of the stars that he fell into a well. As a result of observations made over a long period of time, Thales could have realized that the motions of the fixed stars could not be explained within the idea of the observable hemispherical dome. During the determination of the size of the rising sun, and again while watching its risings and settings during his work on fixing the solstices, Thales may have realized that much natural phenomena could be explained only within the understanding of the Earth as a sphere. From the shore, a ship can be seen to be descending gradually below the horizon, with the hull disappearing from view first, to be followed by masts and sails. If one had a companion observing from a higher point, the companion would see the ship for a long period before it disappeared from view. Aetius recorded the different opinions of the shape of the Earth that were held by Thales, Anaximander, and Anaximenes. Cicero attributed to Thales the earliest construction of a solid celestial globe. Thales' immediate successors proposed theories about the shape of the Earth which were quite different from each other. But that is no reason to reject the view that Thales hypothesized a spherical Earth. It is not the only occasion on which Anaximander and Anaximenes failed to follow the theories of Thales. That they did not do so is the main argument in favor of accepting that the scientific method commenced in the Milesian school. There is testimony that Thales knew the Earth to be spherical, but no evidence to suggest that he proposed any other shape. Thales' theory about the cause of earthquakes is consistent with his hypothesis that Earth floats upon water. It seems that he applied his floating on water simile to the natural phenomena of earthquakes. Aetius recorded that Thales and Democritus found in water the cause of earthquakes, and Seneca attributed to Thales a theory that on the occasions when the Earth is said to quake, it is fluctuating because of the roughness of oceans. Although the theory is wrong, Thales' hypothesis is rational because it provides an explanation which does not invoke hidden entities. It is an advance upon the traditional Homeric view that they resulted from an angry supernatural god Poseidon, shaking the earth through his rapid striding.